Thank you very much. I think we're going to get underway now.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. Sandra is going to chair this property strategy workshop, but I'll just open us up with a karakia to start. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro. Tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I wapo. Kia tau ai, te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e. And just before we get underway, as it's her first time being in front of all the councillors, I would like to introduce Libby. So Libby is our new Manager of Communications and Engagement. She's actually come over from Tauranga, so really... Don't worry, we're better here, you'll find out. But it is a real pleasure to have you on board, working alongside our team. Communications is really important to us. Engagement has been one of our overarching priorities. So we really look forward to having your skills and experience to help us with our journey. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and lovely to meet you, everybody. Any more about this as well. Thanks.
So I'll hand over to Sandra in just a second, but if we can go just to the first slide, whoever's managing the slides, just to cover the purpose. So as you know, we've signed off our annual plan, and as part of that, we had a direction there to really look at our property portfolio in preparation for the long-term plan, which we do anticipate engagement will start next year. As you know, we have quite a significant amount of property. We haven't always understood the condition of it, the longevity left in some of those assets, and importantly, the cost to either maintain, renew, or replace if needed. So based on the Council's direction, we have the property strategy to identify where that investment may be needed and also, if needed, divested. So all of those will come to final decisions later on. We do have this coming to the Council meeting in June, I think. August, thank you, August. But yeah, today's the opportunity to really understand that functions, risk, and also the cost. So I'll now hand over to Sandra.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. This is the first of the workshops for our long-term plan process. This is an open workshop. We have Councillor Wang that's just joining us, I think, on Zoom. Was that the what I just heard coming in now? We also have some morning, Councillor Wang. We also have some members of the public here as well. Just a reminder then, so if we could have our phones off or on silent. So this is a workshop. We had set up a property working group, which I am part of, and that's why I'm chairing this meeting today instead of Your Worship, along with Councillor Barker and Councillor Brown along with staff. Stavros, I don't know if you want to introduce your team to everyone.
I'm Stavros Michael. I'm the General Manager for Infrastructure and Assets, and the property facilities portfolio falls under my responsibility. Russell George here is the manager for our long-term strategic planning for our major assets and our major infrastructure networks. And Samantha Raoni is the facilities manager who is responsible to manage this portfolio.
Thank you very much, Stavros. So Russell, will hand back to you. You probably want to go back to slide 1 on the agenda of Stavros. And
no, thank you, Madam Chair. We'll start the presentation and go through it in more detail. I think from my perspective as officers, it's quite important to outline that the purpose of this workshop today, the way we see this officers, is to daylight to elected members and the public the portfolio and its challenges and risks arising from sensitive ownership we have for this kind of facilities. As Deputy Mayor and the Mayor have worship outlined a working group, started working on draft strategy. And of course, a strategy without agreed outcomes is not really viable. We really need to have outcomes we want to achieve, and the strategy is going to be the vehicle through which we deliver this kind of outcomes. So the framework we're going to discuss today has been and must be adopted by all elected members in due course, and that framework will be eventually part of our long-term plan. It will guide all our actions in this portfolio the same way as our general infrastructure strategy, the 30-year infrastructure strategy guides our actions. We do have a legacy issue where the portfolio has been managed, in the absence of a unified, portfolio strategy, and we want to move forward, in that kind of direction. So the primary objectives of any strategy is to identify clearly the outcomes we want to achieve, to suggest and promote a prudent and proper management of those assets, because they need to be managed at the various levels and of service or importance you want to assign to them. And obviously, we do really want to explore the possibility of reducing, as far as possible, the organization's ongoing liabilities for owning a larger portfolio of assets. So that's the purpose of the workshop, for everyone to understand that kind of framework. And obviously, this is a draft framework for elected members to familiarize themselves with, and eventually a proposed recommended strategy will be considered and adopted by the council, around about August this year. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thanks, Stavros. So we were given terms of reference, and the strategy is to set out how council will manage its property facility assets more effectively. Its main purpose is to identify which council properties are essential for delivering core services and ensure that they're sustainably funded and regularly reviewed. It also must look for opportunities to improve the use of underutilised land and buildings, and to identify assets that are no longer provide long-term or intergenerational value and should be divested to reduce ongoing financial and compliance costs. The strategy is to cover mapping properties to core services, assessing property condition, and developing business cases for alternative uses where appropriate. It also includes creating policy guidance for potential public-private partnerships and developing disposal options for surplus land. What is not included are infrastructure assets such as roads and pipes, gazetted reserves and gifted reserves that are covered by existing protocol agreements.
So could you also just mention what's also part of this, which will be properties under the PAS strategy and other?
Got that coming
up. What we've got for you guys here is a reference to some of our larger facilities, our active facilities, to show some of the things that the condition of certain facilities right now, where we may have taken revitalizations or renewals in the past, but we still have other aspects that need to be addressed. This refers to the outdoor areas of the aquatic centre, where work hasn't yet been carried out or is not planned to be carried out, with the outdoor changing rooms and the barbecues. Our Sir Howard Morrison Centre, though we did a revitalisation not that long ago, there are a number of items still not addressed. It's hard to show on the far left-hand side, but there's actually we get water leaking through and ponding through that fire exit. That was part. That's a back staircase from the theatre. The Sir Owen Glenn's carpet that's not standing up to the level of use that it's seeing. So it questions its obviously in poor condition. It questions its integrity or whether it was fit for purpose in the first place. And a technical storage at the back of house, where incomplete works exist and still need our funds in the future to rectify. EEC. EEC being at Sulphur Point has a lot of geothermal environmental impact. We have cracking in our foyer slab. You can just about see we're getting movement between each slab of the foyer. Our middle point, that's water egress occurring at the junction between the sports drome and the EEC in the back loading dock. And again, another junction point opened up between where the sports drome ends and the EEC begins, where cladding has eroded away and has exposed the timber due to the high geothermal environment that we have going on down there. And something you probably don't see very often, you don't get a view of. We thought it was important to show you a bird's eye view of a couple of our big buildings. The top being our EEC, gives you a good indication of some major aspects in our roofing that need to be addressed with the sports drome, being from the 1970s and not having had a lot of TLC in recent times. As well as the back section of the Sir Howard Morrison Centre. So this is from our stage door side, shows the roof line over our dressing rooms and our service areas that were not in the last revitalisation.
So the other areas that are excluded are PARS, infrastructure and operational equipment. So the facilities policy, strategy and asset management plan fit into our planning framework alongside other infrastructure strategies such as those for Three Waters and transportation. Facilities will be included in the infrastructure strategy for the 2027 long-term plan, filling a gap that currently exists. So the scope of the portfolio includes all facilities owned and managed by Council, including those used by Rotorua, New Zealand. It also includes freehold land that doesn't have encumbrances or designations. It doesn't include the Three Waters assets. Facilities have been categorised based on their status and function. Facilities within each asset group use the same process for management, and Council is able to develop plans and procedures around the group as a whole. So we have visitor and economic enabling for the provision of event and venue management by Rotorua, New Zealand. Administration accommodates Council staff and provides for the democracy function. Activity enabling community, where Council provides a service or experience to the community. Activity enabling regulatory, where Council meets a regulatory requirement, and non-activity enabling buildings. So the purpose of the policy is to ensure a consistent approach to the management of Council-owned facilities and to provide a framework for decision-making. The objectives are that facilities support core services and community outcomes. Decisions align with the LTP, asset management plans and strategic priorities. The portfolio is managed holistically and in a financially prudent manner. There are clear roles, strong governance and transparent decision making, and assets remain fit for service and responsive to change. The decision making process will follow Council delegation policies and procedures, whereby Council has final authority for acquisition, investment, repurposing, gifting and disposal decisions. Committees have the role of making recommendations to Council, and the CE and the Executive Leadership Team maintain assurance and alignment oversight. All decisions relating to these matters are preferably made through the LTP or annual plan, supported by a business case and assessed on benefit, risk and whole of life cost. So the portfolio has been split into activity enabling and non-activity enabling facilities for assessment purposes. Facilities that are defined as enabling are those that are utilised to deliver a Council service. And conversely, facilities that are defined as non-enabling are where they are owned by Council but are not used to deliver a Council service. Criteria have been developed to best assess the enabling and non-enabling facilities and to guide decision making for the portfolio. And I'll go through those a little bit later. What they do is, for the enabling facilities, they're classified into categories with an associated management approach. So for a high importance, they're priority, high value utilised facilities, and they're meant to be managed in a proactive manner and funded to meet higher levels of service needs. Important facilities maintained to an assigned level of service. Low importance, to review the asset and activities, the level of service, managed to keep safe and compliant, and need to consider the long-term viability. And for unimportant facilities, they have low alignment to council direction or strategy, and divestment of the asset needs to be considered. For non-enabling, they are based around the performance. So they're a high-performing facility that's managed in a proactive manner and funded to meet agreed levels of service needs and/or agreement leasing obligations. For marginally performing assets, maintained to an agreed level of service to meet the agreement and the leasing obligations. For low performing, to review the asset and activities, the level of service, manage to keep safe, need to consider the long-term viability. And underperforming, have a low alignment to council direction or strategy, and need to consider the divestment of the asset and align that with the agreed leasing agreements.
We'll just stop there because there's quite a lot of information there, just to check if there are any questions. So because this is a workshop, this is an opportunity to ask a lot of questions while you have them. This is a piece of work that, as I said, has been done by the working group in conjunction with staff, but obviously just wanting to get some feedback if you have any questions, suggestions, amendments, feedback. We're on the right track so far.
Just one question after.
So, sorry, Councillor Sanford, did you have a question?
Yeah, can you just, I think you went over it, so all three water assets are outside of this?
Yes.
PAR's assets
They're outside of
are outside of this. So something like the National Stadium.
the international stadiums.
It's in, but it's also semi in PAR's as well.
Take the stadium, Councillor or Sanford. There are two distinct elements. The stadium is there to provide a playing field. What the facilities service provider is management of the stands, and all the structure behind it. The decision about what is the purpose of the stadium, does it accommodate international event, that it enable community events and so on. It's within the PAR's strategy. This is addressing the structural element within the
and so something like the old landfill, that's not in. Yeah,
no, that's an asset belonging to the waste management activity.
Okay, so waste management is also
part of the infrastructure strategy.
The recycle centres in here.
Okay, so but the entire landfill as a whole, it's more than just the, so you've got all the land around it as well. So that's not in this. No. Okay. That was all I had for now.
Councillor Barker?
Could you just give us a bit more detail, perhaps, on what you meant by operational equipment not being included in this?
Yep. Operational equipment, we're talking about things like goalposts that enable PAR's activities, or technical or IT equipment that might be used to enable an event or service, and also items such as chairs, like we're sitting on right now.
Just to give you an example, Councillor Barker, if you take our two main facilities for conventions, events, and functions, the EEC and the Shimpat, so the Sir Howard Morrison, the Rotorua and Z, which managing those events and functions, identifies that they've got internally components like projectors, computerized systems, lighting, sound systems, so on, that are worth close to $2 million. And do have a lot. Those items with a life expectancy about 3 years because of the geothermal environment they operate through that. So obviously, in looking forward to our investment and funding support of the facilities, is not just the structure of the buildings, but it's the components that enclose within buildings, and they are enabling functions such as performances and so on. So those items are internal to facilities and will be captured by the long-term strategy as distinct from the structural management of the building itself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the first part of the report. One thing I've noted, I was expecting to see land that is council freehold land that is currently used as a reserve, but it had its designation changed with the previous district plan in 2016, and that became operable. So they went from being reserves to now being designated residential. And this is council-owned land. So I would have expected some of that to have been in here.
So when we get a bit further on, there is some land that's identified. The freehold.
Yeah, I think not to be confused though with reserves or recreational reserves. They're designated as recreational reserves precisely for that. We've got other freehold lands which we own as properties, and we'll disclose it very soon.
Next one.
Yeah, thank you. What I appreciate is the early part of the report. Just seeing some of those slides on the EEC and the Sir Morrison Centre, there's stuff that, I liken those buildings to being pretty new to us, and yet already we're saying the carpet is no good in the Sir Howard Morrison, the Sir Owen Glenn Centre. He put $4 million into the asset, and here, only 3 years? Do we not have something where the people who built it or the contractors still have an obligation to?
Generally, in a construction contract, we have a 12-month defect liability period. Everything after that 12 months is something that then becomes what we're trying to achieve here in our policy and strategy, is having a long-term plan for the assets. And no, it's not ideal to see things like that degrade at the rate they are. So it does bring questions to the product, whether we put the right thing in the first place.
But it also will be addressed soon, Councillor Maxwell, is that when you're creating a capital asset, you invest the upfront capital to create the asset. Going forward, you have to maintain that asset both proactively and reactively, and also have to renew that asset. Every component of the asset is got a life expectancy, and until that life expectancy is reached, then obviously you don't renew that asset. And the point of the strategy is to highlight going forward in the future, the facilities and the assets the council wants to maintain under its direct ownership for its own reasons. Then it needs to be funded properly so they can be maintained, proactively and reactively, and also to be renewed, in a prudent manner. So it's quite important to understand the difference between maintenance and reuse. Okay.
So on that point, shall we move to the life cycle principles?
So this leads well into the fourth facilities decision-making life cycle activities. So there's acquisition, and as I said before, best if that's planned through the LTP or the annual plan, there will be the ad hoc decision that are made for various reasons. And for acquisition, considering non-ownership options, retention and maintenance, so asset management plan-based maintenance, compliance with relevant legislation, and making decisions based on good data. For repurpose upgrade decisions, a clear case for change in a formal report that's strategically aligned to where council wants to go. And where no public benefit is present or it's misaligned with the strategy, moving towards disposal. So the facilities strategy lays out a 30-year roadmap to ensure that we meet legislative obligations, support service delivery, deliver essential administration functions, and enable successful event management. This strategy has been developed alongside the facilities policy and asset management plan and ensures evidence-based decisions and life cycle planning are undertaken. The current portfolio consists of a wide range of assets, most of which are midlife or older. The portfolio faces a series of challenges identified through internal stakeholder engagement. These include a lack of clarity and consistency about which parts of the business are responsible for facilities as opposed to the activity, a general response to property asset management reactive rather than proactive, low utilisation rates of some facilities, the corrosive effect of geothermal activity, and it has been largely unclear in the past what financial investment is needed and when. So the strategy outlines 4 strategic themes that build upon one another. The first is portfolio optimisation, where we develop a clear long-term path for each facility. We show how each facility fits within Council's facility strategy and policy. We develop a hierarchy of all Council facilities, helping us decide where investment or divestment is needed now and in the future. We ensure investment is in line with Council's strategic direction and focuses on our highest priority facilities.
We'll stop. Are there any questions around this? Started setting the strategy for Council around. So, any feedback at this point?
Probably just relating to my earlier questions around what was in and what was out, would be good to understand in a way what was outside of this policy, because there's going to be some crossover, like the stadium, for instance, and how that relates to the strategy. So it would be good to understand what's outside and what therefore needs to link in with the strategy into other strategies.
We'll get to that, I think, later on in the presentation. So Russell's got some. So are there any other questions just around the portfolio optimisation? Okay, thank you, Russell.
Okay, so the second one is around transparency. So transparent decisions rely on openness, clarity and accountability. So the strategy to establish clear decision-making processes, establish clear roles and responsibilities, and have good data and evidence-based decision-making.
So are there any questions around this?
So,
I
sorry.
was going to say, partly this has come about because we've outsourced the operations, for example, to Rotorua NZ for the Sir Howard and the Energy Event Centre. However, Council still retains the responsibility for maintaining and funding the renewals for those 2 buildings. So it's just like, how do we establish, who's making the decisions, whose role is it to do whatever, and then making sure that when we're making these decisions, we've got data, we're not just being subjective and thinking something's happening, but we actually have gone and investigated and got the information. Councillor Bentham.
Can I just ask, is this something new that we're doing in terms of our approach to transparency? I suppose from my thinking, all of those things seem like should be quite stock standard approaches to the way that we operate. So when we say establish clear decision-making processes, is it inferencing or referencing that those don't currently exist, or are we reviewing or enhancing current processes? Can you just make that clear for me?
I think just to be clear that statutory all councils have to have what we call a long-term infrastructure strategy. That's a legislative requirement for councils to have it, and we've been having that since 2015-2018. When it comes to property portfolio, the historical approach to the property was not consistent with a long-term strategy. It was more about on a facility basis. Decisions were made without the absence of an overarching framework. And right now we are trying to establish a long-term strategy for all our facilities portfolio that will be consistent with or similar to the infrastructure strategy. So you are right. We did not have a unified strategy for our portfolio in the past. We are now trying to bring it up to the same standards that our infrastructure strategy.
So that's current still, not just past. So that's currently speaking, we still do.
Yes,
that's what this was. Okay.
Councillor Carpenter.
Just a question. Outsourced management of to entities. Would they not have asked about the ongoing here? Would they not have taken that into consideration, that they might be caught further down the track with something that they hadn't expected? Or did they not bother to ask? I'm talking about the other entities that we've outsourced our facilities to.
I think, as Tate, when the events were outsourced or transferred under the responsibility of Rotorua Lakes, the council had undertook to maintain the facilities required for these events. So that agreement did not encompass the management, maintenance, renewal, and functionality of the facilities. The council retained that responsibility, and that's some decisions we have to make going forward. I think we'll hit eventually to your decisions as to how do you want to fund both the what's happening within the building, how you manage the facilities.
Okay. So the third one is strategic themes around asset management, and this outlines the need for proactive maintenance based on condition and asset servicing requirements, life cycle based facilities planning, which we talked about a bit earlier, and improved asset data, demand forecasting, and stable asset condition. And the fourth one theme, to ensure we can continue to invest in facilities that meet the needs of our community now and into the future. This requires council to make sure its approach is both financially responsible and sustainable. So prudent and sustainable investment decision making. The 10-year financial plan for the operating and capital expenditures using a bottom-up approach for detailed forecasting and a top-down review for strategic alignment. And presenting a clear financial sustainability picture of each facility and the entire portfolio to inform council decision making.
Any questions there? That's a key point around financial sustainability as we enter into a long-term plan process.
I just want to point out here that this was one of the big reasons why we tasked staff with doing this piece of work, is so that we weren't basically ending up in a reactive state where there was unbudgeted maintenance or renewals that was having to take place, and that basically we could get a real clear picture for the next 10 years, which is also importantly consulted with the community on how we would support, invest, potentially divest some of the assets based on a number of factors.
Can I just say, I think it is important to recognise that we're not starting from scratch. You know, we've already got a regime that we've been working to. It might have had some glitches and some slippage in certain areas, but we're certainly not starting from scratch. We just want to improve and make sure that we're fit for future purpose. So, it was how it's going. But I know that we're not just starting from scratch.
So when we prioritise, I talked earlier, we've split them into enabling and non-enabling. So for the enabling, these are the criteria that have been used to assess the property. So we've got service enabling. So what is the level of importance or requirement of the service or activity provided by the council, provided to the council from the building, property or facility? What strategic importance or function does the property facility have? The level of utilisation of it, what level of funding does the facility need from council, what level of revenue to overall costs, what level of cultural and heritage significance does the property facility have, and what is the possibility for the service to be consolidated or transferred to, delivered from another council site or location or through other providers.
We'll just stop there and see if there are any questions around this.
How did you come up with the weighting?
So the weighting was just, we've used consultants to help guide it with expertise and just really just experience.
Well, again, Councillor Patterson, remember this is a draft, piece of work. This is what the working group and ourselves have arrived at. It's obviously ultimately decisions elected members would make. If you want to change some of it later on, by all means, that's the privilege of elected members, to say we'd like to more importance onto to that and less importance something else. But this is the draft framework we have at this point in time.
One of the reasons I asked that question is that some of the conflict that has arisen in our community is because of cultural and heritage significance, and it got quite loud. So to me, that would be one we'd have to be very, very careful about before making any serious.
No debate about that. I think from the officer's perspective, the important thing is for elected members to understand you want to elevate something at a high level. There is a financial imposition behind that too, and then when you make management decisions behind that, those management and investment decisions has to be consistent with the level of importance assigned to something, and I think that's the purpose of our exercise.
May you have a question?
Yes, so the title of this particular frame is Prioritisation Framework. As a prudent property owner, isn't it a priority to make sure the buildings that we own at least are watertight as a sort of a foundational priority?
Compliant, you mean?
No, I mean watertight because
the word tightness is part of the building code compliance.
So that's already taken into account?
Right.
Yet we've seen photos earlier in the presentation of watertight.
This is to
Yep.
solve.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. Councillor, is that as I said, I think Councillor Rotorua said, well, we have some history here.
Yep.
Certain things were done fine, certain things not so fine. What the picture you're seeing is that the gaps in our execution, and we need to try going forward to address it.
So yeah, I mean, those are the issues that strike me as a priority, because obviously the damage that can be done by water is going to be expensive to fix later if it's not jumped on quickly.
No argument with that.
Is that reflected in this frame, or how it works?
I think what we're saying at the moment is that if a facility is of strategic importance to the council, obviously number one is to make sure that it's compliant with whatever codes of compliance that are available. If a facility is of a strategic nature that you want to invest more than just compliance, that's the decisions you want to make. If other facilities are really underutilized, and that you want to divest at some point in time, the question to be asked is that when do you stop investing into that and you proceed, to offload that asset?
So if we look at the next slide, those criteria are used and to work out where the facilities fit. And the bottom line there is the management approach to it. So for high importance assets, they're a priority asset. Ensure the asset is managed and funded to meet higher levels of service needs. And if you work across, that's the management approach. So the weather tightness should be a factor in that. So they are the properties, the enabling properties, and where they've ended up. So take any questions.
So just on that point too, so on these slides it does identify public toilets. Just to be clear, we're not looking at divesting public toilets, but we have agreed as part of the long-term plan discussion to have a level of service discussion. So I don't know if you just want to comment further on that, Stavros, just so we don't go down that path of just looking at the public toilets and why they've been identified there.
Actually, Madam Chair, I fully agree with your comments. I think that public toilets, rural or not, probably this isn't the right framework to apply it to, but we'll apply a framework that has similar principles when we do the level of service review.
Another element you will consider later on as elected members, again, we don't propose to step into your prerogative to make decisions, especially with regards to level of service. But if a facility service the needs of 5,000 people, its importance is at a given level. If it's serving 10 people, the importance, is it the same importance? Is that you want to manage an asset at the same level?
And that principle will apply when we do the level of service review.
And if you look at the unimportant assets, this isn't saying that they should all be divested. This is saying that it should be investigated. It should be looked at, and a lot more data to come to council. Good data about making a decision on what you want to do with it, whether it's repurposing or divesting.
Councillor Timonelli.
Just a question. So these have been determined based on the previous framework?
Yes.
Okay, sweet. So these have been assessed based on that framework, and if we are to increase importance of different aspects of that framework, that would change where these sites sit. Because I'm sure a few councillors are looking at some of those sites and saying, okay, potentially not quite in the right area, but I just wanted to have that clarity just to make sure.
If I can just add, it's your prerogative to say the formula puts it there, but actually based on our qualitative assessment, we just want to move it. That's entirely within your duty, because the formula is a guide rather than deterministic. So if it doesn't feel right, by all means, councillors have the prerogative to move it around.
So we go back to the principles that we did agree around using data and evidence-based decision making. So this is not just we think it might be nice if we shift something. So that's why we wanted to set out the strategic framework at the start. But Councillor Sanford, and then your worship, and then Councillor Peterson.
Yeah, I guess similar sort of vein of thought here. Just looking at the prioritisation framework, the assets on the next page. So the eyesight in the redwoods is not. There's the eyesight on Fenton Street, which is high importance, and the eyesight in the redwoods, which is low importance.
Get them to comment on that because there's a reason for that.
Is that because of the heritage of the building?
Correct.
So when we talk about eyesight, we're actually talking about the entire building, the cafe and the offices. We're not just talking about the eyesight, which is a new part of the building. Okay.
We're talking about the whole facility as a structure, has a heritage tag to it. So hence, yes, it's scored different to the redwoods eyesight.
It would be good if you're thinking you want to move them without altering the weightings, to know why, because then we can look at the criteria. There may be a different criteria that you're considering that we've not taken into account.
Sorry, do you have another question?
Just to follow up on that point, I guess, like if because I would just say the weighting here is very much in terms of this strategic property piece, but there might be. Going back to this because we talked about PARS, there might be something in PARS that then crosses over and says that what's one in here? The stadium is somehow, very important to do these purposes. So then we shift it. So from my side, I guess as long as we have this strategy, but also we know how it relates to other strategies, and we can move things up or down.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think the idea is that we don't want the facilities management to ride ahead of the intended function of the facility. The function has to dictate how the facility needs to be managed. And if you consider that an activity is important, then the facility needs to slave to that kind of direction. And then we'll come back later on, you'll find that some of our facilities, I think about 10% of our portfolio, is being classified as in poor structural condition. Just I will emphasize now, this is a structural condition. It does not mean the facility is fit for your intended purpose too. The stadium, for example, might not be in danger of collapsing, but is it at a state or is it at a level of presentation and functionality you want it to be? And these are decisions you have to make.
Yeah, I just wanted to just emphasize that this is just the start of this. So although we've used a criteria, like I would suggest utilisation is very important, is potentially higher, but I think we do run the risk of not being strategic about it when you look across all of the portfolio. There are certainly some where once we hear from the community, or we already have heard from the community, would be more important, and then let's deal with it at that stage. But I think collecting that baseline, what's the actual state of the asset before there just is a real risk that it can easily become politicized, and we start putting forward, we basically mess with the genuine, this asset is in a significantly poor state and may need to be upgraded, over where else would we have the financial capability to invest in it once we start looking at where that falls in each year of the long-term plan.
So we're going to come
that
to
makes sense.
It does. And we've got some detailed sort of financial information just at a very high level, which just sort of cements some of the discussion that we're having today about why we're trying to be strategic around these assets. So, Councillor,
just a point of clarification, if I may, the legality and the legislative requirements about some of these assets that you have up there that we actually have to have. I understand we have to have a dog pound, is that correct? We do have to have a crematorium?
Sorry, no. But if we operate a crematorium, it needs to comply with certain standards.
So of the first two, which ones are actually legislative requirements to have? That's it, just the dog pound. Okay.
I think can I just step in? Sorry, I think really good point. If we can sit as a team, we indicate the difference between having a facility legislatively compliant, if we have it, versus a legislative requirement to have that facility in the first place. And rather than debating it here, maybe let's just take that as an action to indicate that on everything going forward and make sure we keep that visible.
Thank you.
thanks, Russell.
So next, if we move on to the non-activity enabling, so these are the ones that are not used to deliver a council service. The criteria, and it's heavily weighted towards return on investment. So the percentage gain or loss generated from the facility compared to the value of the facility. 35% for social community benefit. And then we have smaller weightings towards the current optimisation and what level of optimisation could it have in the future. So basically, because of the mainly because of the return on investment at 45%, most of them are low or underperforming because they're heavily subsidised by council. The only one that sits above that is Waikiri.
Stop there. Just at this point, remember, this is just a very sort of piece of work that's been done with a very small working group. No decisions have been made. This is just a discussion document. So really wanting feedback and input from councillors at this point. Councillor Timura Benfeld.
Can we go back one slide? Is it possible, so with the social and community benefit, are we identifying that as how many people utilise the facility, or are we undergoing an assessment of what is the return on what's the social return on our dollar of investment in terms of like a social return on investment, or is it purely just based on use?
No, so the utilisation is around the optimisation. But so social community benefit what's being delivered out of it? Does that provide a social or community benefit?
And so how is that assessed in terms of what benefit that provides? Is it just the quantity of activities being run, or is it
the sorts of activities that are being?
So it's this. Okay. So it's the sort of activities and the quantity of activities being run through that.
The quantity, the optimisation will deal with
Quantity.
Okay.
There is a
Is it possible, like I suppose, in that social community benefit, For me, it would be helpful to understand what exactly we are assessing as social and community benefit. And I think as well, because I've seen a financial assessment on for every dollar you invest in social outcomes, you get a return of $3 or $4 back. So potentially restructuring as a social return on investment rather than a monetary return on investment potentially might be a structure. But if I don't know if we can have more information about what actually we are assessing as part of social community benefit, because it can be quite a subjective.
Yes,
it's quite a subjective.
You're absolutely right, Councillor Penfield. I think sort of I just want to draw a demarcation line. This team here are people who are employed to do facilities management. The people on that side of the desk, elected members through your long-term plan, your community engagement and so on, you're tasked to actually evaluate, maybe subjectively many times, the community's desire to do something, what we call social benefits. So at some point in time, the cost of managing the facility or the investment required to manage the facility and the social community benefits have to come to a kind of comparative alignment. I don't think that we have a sophisticated way of evaluating the community benefit at this point in time, but we present it to you, daylighting for you. If you're going to have a facility, you need to be very clear. Those facilities are a financial liability for this organization. And then how you want to balance that versus the funding revenue of the facility versus the community outcomes is entirely the prerogative of elected members, for which obviously we work with to do.
I think that's certainly a recommendation from me, because I would like to understand the return, because there are organisations that are able to assess when we invest $1 into the Arts Village, we're getting $4 return in social good, for example. I think that would be very helpful to understand in our assessment, going back to Her Worship's comments around being data driven. Yeah.
Can I just ask a question of CE? You've probably, out of all of us, done a lot more of a deep dive into the government's changes of what we are allowed to do and what we are not supposed to be doing, with what Councillor Benfeld's comments about social good. I mean, how much is that going to be taken away from us, and what's your reading on it?
Through you, Madam Chair, that the government legislation change around the purpose of local government, removal of the well-beings, and the definition of what the purpose of local government does is well understood now, and we've circulated, and I think I've covered it in some previous presentations. That still offers councils broad discretion about how they make those local decisions based on their local community and the local elected representatives. So I'm comfortable that nothing we've seen here is steps outside what the new legislative framework will be. Sorry, that doesn't help you narrow it down, but it does empower you quite a bit to make those decisions as you see fit locally.
And I just emphasise that decision is up to us, and there still are functions that either this council or our community through us decide are still core service and important to deliver.
Can we just go back again, please? Because I think it's you've raised actually a very important issue around the return on social investment, and it's not new now, and it's really quite important because within 5 to 8 years, if we've got our community accessing and our facilities, the sports facilities, etc., there should over 5 to 8 years been a drop off in the spend of the health dollar, and that's assisting central government. But it's also ensuring that the people in our community are living well. They're living to a standard that they're contributing through good jobs and participation in the labour force. So this is really important, and to have it up there does require. I mean, I'm pleased it's there up there as a criteria, but there's enough information around today to see where local government can even enhance it further. So just because the central government said 4 wellbeings are off the scene altogether, that's fine, but we can do our bit to ensure that our community is well, with houses that are fit for purpose, contributing, through education, training and employment, all of these sort of things, and it comes out of the community. And that is the social return on investment that we can assist with by making it a criteria and looking at everything with that lens. So it is important. So thank you for raising that.
I would counter that. I think you're right. Both you, the balance of that is affordability. We drive around some of our suburbs, people aren't looking after their homes, which you've just mentioned. And that comes down to how, partly the cost of living and what they pay in rates. So there's a balancing act here. I agree with what you're saying, but we've got to find a balance in the cost of these facilities. And we're going to get to that because it is expensive and there's a deficit. So, just using the other side of the equation.
One from it. On the next page, I was just wondering, is a high-performing asset, is that over 75%? Is a marginally performing asset over 50%, or are you using a different weighting?
So we go back to the return on investment. So there's criteria and then there's rankings of those. There's a social community benefit, and then the current and future optimization. So they're each of those criteria are given a score, and then it puts them into
You've got 4 categories. Is it 25% for each?
It's a 1 to 5 score. You're building up those weightings of the 5 aspects. A high performing, in the example of Waikiri hot pools, ended up with a 4.6% score out of 5. Then the next highest score of each buildings was 3 out of 5.
Okay, so it's not like a 50%. No. It's a low performing, and okay.
Part of this discussion can also be is when we ask the community, there may be other ways of delivering some of these services as well, not just through building. Council can provide support in other ways. So that's also when we get into the financial discussion, the necessity to have some of these services, but do we also need to continue to deliver them with some of the costs that we're going to just talk about now? So back to you.
Sorry,
Russ.
just before we move on to that one, sorry, I had my hand up, but probably didn't see it. That's all good. I also, my question was kind of already asked by a few of the councillors already around the social return on investment. So thank you for that. I guess just around some of these non-activity enabling assets, when we talk about future optimization, so does that take into account whether or not those assets are on gifted reserves, and if there was going to be a change in use, that could also affect whether or not we do end up having the asset in the future?
I think, Councillor, I think the whole idea is that if the strategy framework identifies for council what is an important facility to have, either for financial or for community benefit reasons, that's one thing. But if the councillors, elected members, decide that's not as important to us, and that facility sits on a gifted reserve, then obviously we've got disposal protocols behind that, which says before we actually dispose that facility can go back into the entity that gifted that reserve. So that disposal policy will kick in. The important thing is for you as elected members to understand that that a facility it's either very important for your activities or less important to something else. The bottom line is that every one of the facilities has an investment demand on it, and then you have to evaluate through some kind of prioritization process where do you want to do more investment and why.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess just following on from that, I really would also like to see that kind of dollar value on that social return on investment, because I think that helps paint a better picture on this topic specifically, to help us make that decision. My final one just on this slide is just around our I guess unique relationship that the Polynesian Spa has. Is that included in this as a underperforming asset, or is that because of that specific legislative, relationship that we have with that? Is it categorized as something else?
It'll be in the reserves management plan that we have, but thank you for asking. It is of interest to the community.
Thank you.
Councillor Timothy Bento.
Sorry, just a question. So we have a couple of significant commercial businesses that are currently occupying property, and they're in a low performing asset. So we're not currently making, I don't know if this is a commercially sensitive question, but so we're not currently making a return on either of the, I'm looking at in particular at 70 Street and 163 Lake Road.
Correct.
The return, if you compare the value of those holdings to what the payments to the council or return to the council, is just a very low return on investment.
Wow, okay.
So this is one of the reasons where council's looking at this is we've got a portfolio of about $560 million. Depreciated replacement cost is at the end of the last financial year is about 44% of that. So that's the unutilised based on age. So from that, we've calculated out annual depreciation, renewals, and the maintenance costs. And the bottom line just shows for the annual plan you've just adopted how much is in for renewals and the maintenance. And especially for maintenance, that's quite a big gap. So what we should be spending on assets to maintain all of this whole portfolio, to maintain them to the levels of this, is 5.4 million for maintenance costs. We've got about 1.6 million there.
The important element I would like to emphasize on that, and these numbers are lower numbers, and you can break it down into the facilities, although the historical information was not good enough to break it down the facility by facility. But it's a snapshot of the fact that a portfolio of facilities and property of $560 million is just second to the value of your sewage system. The sewage system is about $600 million. Your routing network is about $1 billion. This is the third biggest portfolio you've got. Now, you can see the depreciated value of it is roughly about just 44% of that. The question is that it's just an indicator that historically the value of these properties and facilities is being consumed. And then at some point in time, you can either continue to drive it into the ground to value zero, which means you've foregone a value of $560 million, or you continue to start a systematic and prudent investment to maintain its value. You don't drive it into the ground. It just shows to you the quantum of annual investment council has to commit into these facilities. And that I'll leave it lie there. As I said, you can play a little bit around with numbers, but in rough water, in holistic water, this is the annual investment required for prudent management. And if you break it down into the various facilities groupings, economic, administration, regulatory, enabling community, you can see which cluster of activities is serviced by the largest facilities value. It's not a purpose of today to discuss it, but just 3 points I would like to leave with you today, please. One, you've got facilities that are worth to replace over $560 million. Two, if you want to keep all of them, SAR, the annual investment is in the region of $15 million a year for renewals and maintenance, let alone operations and utilities and all these elements that are documented. And then the question is that eventually you have to ask the question, how do we fund it? Do we fund it all through rates? Do we fund it through user pays? Is it affordable to the community? Does it derive social benefit as Councillor Rakawa stated? That's not the purpose of the workshop, here and today. But the strategy really needs to tease these questions, is to ask these questions. If we're going to keep all that, this is the financial dashboard for you. If you want to start reducing those liabilities, you need to start obviously by questioning the non-activity enabling facilities that does not support your primary activities, and then you start looking for alternatives to that. So that's the purpose of this picture.
So, Sebas, can you also just, because we had those slides at the beginning, it doesn't include any reactive maintenance, actually bring them back to where they should be.
No.
So we factored that in. The financial, we haven't got those figures anyway, but that's based on accounting standards of what we set aside for depreciation renewals. But if we have to do some reactive maintenance to bring them to where they should be, had we spent the right depreciation renewals amount each year.
However, you're right, those figures are industry conservative figures. If you consider the replacement value and the depreciated value, the gap there is about $220 million. And yes, you don't renew everything up to the maximum value, but there is a historical gap. And that gap, you can either address it through systematic renewals and systematic better maintenance, or you invest a lot of money to bring it up to a high level of condition. So that's what I'm saying. This is a conservative approach. We think that for that amount of renewals and that amount of maintenance, you have a good chance to maintain those facilities at a stable and safe condition and compliant condition. That's what they're saying at this point.
So just an extension of that then, what is the deficit? Because if we fund the R&M to the levels that you're suggesting, that brings it back to where we are today, but we've seen in some of the photos that there's a deficit. So is there how could we get some visibility on the deficit to deal with water tightness, as an example, from Councillor Lee?
We can calculate that. We can go back and do some calculation on two levels. You've got a going forward stable condition, but also you can do a retrospective assessment of what is the critical components that the capital, let's say, addresses one-off, before you get to stability. I imagine that we in the region of a few dozen $1 billion.
Yes.
Say that again.
Did you say, Stevens?
If you want to bring the facilities at the level that captures not all the historical consumption of the facility, but a portion of it, I imagine that would be in a few dozens of millions of dollars.
A few dozens of millions.
At least thousands of millions.
Tens of millions.
Really big. Thousands of millions.
Can I caution you too, is that our general infrastructure does have similar deficits. And the fact that we do have a systematic renewal and maintenance portion in it, it ensures a high degree of stability of the assets. So I just, those numbers here is just, as I said, it's a yardstick for you to move forward and say, well, can we reduce some of that, somehow? Do we need all the, for example, do we need all the $94 million of non-activity enabling facilities, or can we do something that is beneficial to the wider community by doing something different?
I'm just mindful of time. We've got 3 more slides, so we'll go back to then to finish the...
Skip the next, because that's just based on a graphical presentation of the life that's left. But in terms, we talked around a bit earlier around limitations on divestment. So these are the facilities that are heritage listed and non-gifted reserve. So that limits what you can do. And then the working group have identified some where we can start looking at business cases. So in the activity enabling the Vaughan Road FFO, in the non-activity enabling 7T Street, 14 Tenai Road, 163 Lake Road, which are all leased out, and then Tenai Road land and the Sala Street land.
The question, the leased ones, because I know there's definitely one in that category where someone really wishes to purchase it, but is that only where it doesn't, is it only the building? We don't own the land.
7 T Street, we are building owners only, but the Tenai and Lake Road, we are land and building owners.
Okay.
Again, just in the early stages at the moment, for those business cases to be developed in a way that will give the optimal benefit for the council, we can start doing some preparation work onto that, but obviously would not do anything until elected members, have full approval for it. On the basis of the criteria we identified earlier, within these properties that, there are a not inconsiderable value, we can start thinking as to what other options have behind.
Just a question on 2 that are not listed up there that are on the earlier list of non-activity enabling buildings, community halls. It's not listed there, and I know we've seen papers previously about the condition that they are in. Discussions have been had about whether the communities themselves take them on, those sort of things, and the other one was pensioner housing. Is that because we're dealing with that separately?
Separate. And Councillor Patterson, you're right. Pensioner housing also already have made some decisions on that. Community hall is mostly a level of service, and elected members have to consider what is the level of service you can provide there. If the level of service, it would be, and I'm not suggesting that, I'm just saying possibility is to say council has received those buildings, historically they've been vested to them. Council will maintain them at a particular standard. If the council is not interested to do that, then a conversation with the local communities will take place, and you might have a way of, do you want to manage it? Do you want the council to give you a grant, every year to manage it? I don't know the answer to that until you actually have these conversations, okay? So we own these facilities at the moment. The community halls, for example, are worth somewhere in the region of $10 to $12 million replacement value. And out of that, you have maintenance costs and renewals and ownership, liabilities and so on. So, but if a council is going to maintain all 10 community halls, that's fine. If you want to have a conversation with the local communities to share some burden, that's fine. We just identify them as, at this point in time, not seen to be the number one activity support facility.
Does it also apply to the previous slide? So maybe other options in the way in which these assets are managed or used, or we haven't considered those other options yet. So does that include the tea rooms?
The tea rooms is an activity enabling facility. I think we have only addressed in the heritage list those sitting in the non-enabling.
Sorry.
This is associated to what we're discussing here, but one of the things I think this highlights is the visitor and economic enabling properties and whether the business targeted rate pays for the occupancy costs. There's a question I guess comes somewhere.
On that note, the question, it needs to come somewhere, but maybe if you could let us know, because one of the other questions, we're talking about the cost only here, and really appreciate the amount of work that's gone into assessing it, like phenomenal. Thank you so much. But then also, as well as cost, there's potential, what could, like, if we were to make it 100% to its full potential, what would that look like? And is there revenue generating that would then offset the cost, which is what we've done with the commercialisation of the event centre in Sir Howard. So at some stage in the near future, I think there'll be of great interest, especially to give enough time to any potential public-private partnerships or lease agreements or anything where we could help to offset the cost on our ratepayers to fulfil our aspiration of all of these facilities not only being compliant but actually being fully utilised.
Thank you, Worship. I think, my colleague, David Jensen's here too. I think obviously during the LTP, To pick up an example for effect here. In your energy event center, if the energy event center costs us X amount of dollars to pay Rotorua and Z, to operate, and it costs us another $5-6 million to maintain that building, and it generates $10 million of costs and generates $2 million of revenue, for example. Okay, you may in your long-term plan decide that we want that ratio to change. Instead of 20% revenue and 80% from rates, you may want to make it 50-50, or you make it 80-20, or whatever it is. I don't know the answer to that. Okay, the important thing is for us to disclose to you that the true cost of that facility, it is what it is. Then you decide how do you want to fund that, that ratio between the two, options. I don't know. I'm agnostic about that, and that's who can give you that information, but that's decisions you elected members have to make.
Any final questions? Otherwise, Councillor.
So just confirming, so our property disposal policy is going to be reviewed as part of the strategy. Just going back a few slides to the I think it's something about life cycle principles, acquisition, retention, repurposed, disposal. I have for a couple of months, just in different meetings and stuff, bringing to the attention of staff and elected members the right of first refusal policy as part of our disposal policy. So Tauranga City Council and Horowhenua District Council both have fantastic examples of that. That is something I would certainly advocate for and want to see as certainly as part of a draft for elected members to consider, and templates to exist across the country. But yeah, happy to provide. And I have reviewed, and I actually have it sitting in front of us, our property disposal policy, and it doesn't have anything along those lines in it.
Well, thank you, Councillor. Certainly, we officers we would put in front of the council of these options to consider, to review and refresh the disposal policy. These are decisions you have to make, but certainly can incorporate examples of other disposal policies as you mentioned.
I think also too, we're just talking about the strategic framework as opposed to the operational, how we would dispose of them. So we'll kind of just do these pieces of work.
Yeah, absolutely understand. Well, I suppose for me, I'm just going to keep plugging it as many times as possible just to get the message through that that's a policy that I'm advocating for. So from now till then, I'll be plugging it.
This is perfectly sufficient.
Yes, Councillor.
Got a good supporter here.
I'd like to thank the working group and staff for the work that's gone into this. This is a helpful start of a conversation, so well done to those involved. The page, you mentioned that the numbers that we've crunched here are based on accounting standards, and understand that. I'd just like to efficiency issue as about how we go about spending our money. When we look at the Mamaku example, they will tell us that they were able to fix their building at about a third of the price that council would otherwise have costed to fix that particular building. So it must be, I mean, they went about something in a smarter way that got a good result for the ratepayers and got their building fixed. Does that factor into the equation? Well, the efficiency question?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. As an elected member, you're entitled to and actually obligated to set a policy framework for this item, okay? But also you're entitled to have an expectation the implementation of that policy will be done as efficiently as possible. Okay? So no problem with that. I don't want to pick up an example because I know a little bit more about the Mamaku side. When you invest to do something, you need to look into how long it's going to last. If you're going to do something to last me for the next 3 years, then you invest. I don't want to spend a lot of money on it. But if you want to invest something that will last me 50 years, it's a different story. So, but I think you as elected members, with all due respect, with all you loyalty to as officers to elected members, you're fully entitled to say, we give you a strategic framework, we expect you also to deliver it in the most cost-efficient way, and that's accepted. We are working.
Thank you.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one last question, going back to Par's question. Will we have a similar presentation on the, I guess you could say, new structure, proposed structure or direction that's come from the research that we've done over the last 3 years or 4 years now, I think, to come up with what parks and reserves, etc., we need to maintain, how much money we need to invest in the ones that have fallen down and the other ones that are no longer fit for purpose. Will we have that similar presentation like this?
I believe that's the approach, but Alex and Robert are here too. I think the intention of the past strategically has been the same. Similar way. What is the demand for these facilities? What do we have? How do we classify what's important? What options do we have going forward?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The PARS strategy has gone through a process to identify recommendations, and now we're looking at prioritisation of those recommendations, which we will come back to the council with. Much like the infrastructure asset management plan, we have an asset management plan for facilities within reserves, which could be a picnic table or at goalposts and all sorts of things like that, even just the turf itself. So we have an asset management plan that works through that. We haven't been looking at this similar type of presentation against all those assets. We could try and do some work in that space. The main bit that we're coming back is actually around the priorities that the community have suggested and how do they then align with what we need for the long-term plan.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of today's workshop. Please feel free to still provide any further suggestions or comments that you want to into the working group as we progress this piece of work as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. I'll ask Councillor Maxwell to close the meeting, and then if I could just ask councillors just to stay back for a couple of minutes. So, Councillor Maxwell.
Kia tātou katoa te ata whai o te tātou e reke ai ukaraiti. Me te aroha o te atua me te whiwhinga tahitangi ki ta wairua tapu ai anei a. Ake tōna matu. Amen. Amen. Kia ora koutou.